My husband left me for another woman, and I thought that was the worst thing that could happen. I was wrong, because what happened in court changed everything. 1. The life I believed in. I remember the exact morning I believed my life was perfect. The sunlight filtered through the curtains like it always did, soft and warm, landing gently on the walls we had chosen together. The house smelled of coffee and freshly toasted bread. Outside, the city was waking up, unaware that inside these walls, a life was quietly balancing on fragile hope. I was 34 years old, married for 9 years. No scandals. No chaos. No warning signs, at least none I wanted to see. To the world we were ordinary. To me we were solid. My husband, Daniel, was the kind of man people trusted instantly. Calm voice. Clean reputation. The sort of man neighbors greeted with respect and co-workers described as reliable. He worked long hours, yes, but he always said it was for us. For our future. And I believed him. Because belief is easy when love has trained you not to question. Our marriage wasn't cinematic. There were no grand gestures or dramatic fights. It was built on routines, shared grocery lists, late-night conversations about nothing important, quiet weekends that felt safe. I thought that was what real love looked like. Stability. I had given up certain dreams for this life. I turned down a promotion that required travel. I delayed further education. I reshaped my ambitions to fit the life we were building. Not because he asked me to, but because marriage teaches you compromise, and sometimes it teaches you to disappear slowly. Still, I didn't feel unhappy. I felt chosen. That illusion mattered more than I realized. There were signs, of course. Looking back, the story rewrites itself in my mind with painful clarity. The late meetings that stretched into midnight. The phone always face down on the table. The sudden need for privacy I was told was professional stress. When I asked questions, I was met with gentle smiles and tired sighs. Not everything is a problem, he would say. And so I learned to swallow my doubt. I learned that love sometimes demands silence, and I paid that price willingly. Until the silence became unbearable. The first crack appeared on an ordinary Tuesday. I had gone to surprise him at work with lunch, something I hadn't done in years. I remember standing outside the building, holding a paper bag that was already getting cold, rehearsing the smile I would give him. But he wasn't there. The receptionist looked confused when I said his name. She checked her system twice. He left early today, she said. With someone. With someone. That phrase followed me home like a whisper that wouldn't stop. I didn't confront him that night. I watched him carefully instead. The way he avoided my eyes. The way his voice sounded distant, as if he was already somewhere else. That night I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, wondering how two people could share a bed and still feel miles apart. The truth didn't arrive dramatically. It arrived through a message that wasn't meant for me. A phone left unlocked. A notification that lit up the screen. A name I didn't recognize but somehow already feared. I miss you. Today felt incomplete without you. There are moments in life when time slows down, not to comfort you, but to make sure you feel every second of pain. That was one of them. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I sat there holding the phone, realizing that my marriage hadn't broken overnight. It had been dissolving quietly, while I was still holding it together. When I confronted him, there were no apologies, only explanations. Carefully worded sentences about feeling lost, about needing happiness, about not planning for this to happen. He said her name out loud, and suddenly she was real. Not an idea. Not a mistake. A person who had replaced me in ways I didn't yet understand. I want a divorce, he said. Not angrily. Not emotionally. As if he were returning something that no longer fit. The days that followed felt unreal. Friends called. Family offered support. Everyone spoke in absolutes. You'll be fine. You deserve better. Time will heal. But no one talks about the humiliation. No one prepares you for the quiet shame of being left. I moved through my days like a ghost, signing papers, answering emails, packing away memories I hadn't realized were already expired. When the legal process began, I assumed it would be simple. Painful but fair. I didn't know then that divorce is not just the end of love. It is the beginning of war. The courtroom was colder than I expected. The walls didn't care about feelings. The judge didn't care about history. And the law cared only about proof. My husband sat across the room, composed and confident, with a woman beside him. The other woman. She didn't look like a villain. She looked calm, prepared, certain. And for the first time since everything began, I felt something worse than heartbreak. I felt underestimated, because they believed this story was already over. They thought I was just the woman who had been left. They had no idea what the truth would reveal. And neither did I. 2. The version of me they created. The first day of court didn't feel like justice. Felt like a performance. Everyone had a role, and I was already being cast as something I didn't recognize. I sat there, hands folded, spine straight, trying to look calm while my heart hammered against my ribs. Across the room my husband looked prepared. Not nervous. Not ashamed. Prepared. Like someone who had rehearsed this moment. That should have been my first warning. When his lawyer stood up, his voice was smooth, almost sympathetic. "This is a case of emotional incompatibility," he said. "No abuse. No wrongdoing. Just a marriage that slowly fell apart. Slowly. As if erosion doesn't destroy entire landscapes. As if time alone had undone everything and not choices." I waited for the truth to appear. I believed it would announce itself naturally. I didn't understand yet that in court, truth doesn't speak unless someone fights for it. Then came the first twist. Not the kind that shocks you instantly, the kind that settles into your stomach and makes you feel sick. My husband testified first. He spoke about loneliness. About feeling unsupported. About how I had changed. He said I became distant. Cold. Unavailable. He said I focused too much on my own routines. That I stopped listening. That I emotionally abandoned him long before he ever met her. And then he looked at the judge and said something that stole the air from my lungs. She was controlling. Controlling. The word echoed in my head like a verdict already decided. I wanted to stand up. To scream that I had shaped my entire life around him. That I had shrunk myself to fit into his expectations. But courtrooms don't care about emotional truth. They care about narratives. And he had built one. The other woman was introduced next. Not as a reason for the divorce, but as a consequence of it. She testified calmly. She said she met him when he was already broken. Already neglected. Already unhappy. She said she didn't steal him. She saved him. And suddenly, I wasn't the wife who had been betrayed. I was the obstacle he had escaped. That night, I went home and stared at the walls of my apartment, trying to understand how reality had been rewritten so quickly. How 9 years of marriage could be reduced to accusations. How easily I had been blamed for trusting. That's when I realized something terrifying. They weren't just ending the marriage. They were erasing my credibility. My lawyer tried to reassure me. "This is common," she said. "They're setting the tone. Don't react emotionally." But how do you not react when your life is being reframed in public? How do you stay calm when silence is being mistaken for guilt? I asked her if the affair mattered. She hesitated. "Only if we can prove overlap," she said. "Otherwise, it's just unfortunate timing." Unfortunate timing. As if betrayal had a calendar. Then came the documents. Emails. Messages. Work records. Evidence my husband's side submitted to show how checked out I was. Messages taken out of context. Busy weeks portrayed as neglect. Moments of exhaustion painted as indifference. I watched strangers analyze my personality based on fragments of my life. And I realized something else. I had underestimated how much preparation had gone into this. Because this wasn't a man reacting to a divorce. This was a man executing a strategy. The real twist arrived quietly. During a short recess, I noticed something strange. My husband wasn't sitting with his lawyer. He was whispering with her. Not nervously. Not emotionally. Strategically. They spoke in low voices, occasionally glancing in my direction. Not with guilt, but with calculation. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about love. This was about control. That night, unable to sleep, I opened old boxes I had carried with me from the house. Receipts. Calendars. Notes. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for clarity. And instead, I found patterns. Trips that overlapped with his work conferences. Expenses that didn't match his explanations. dates that no longer aligned with his story. The affair hadn't started after our marriage collapsed. It had started while I was still fighting to save it. I brought this to my lawyer the next morning. She looked concerned but cautious. "This helps," she said slowly. "But we need more. Something concrete. Something undeniable." I nodded. And for the first time since everything began, I felt something shift inside me. I stopped seeing myself as the abandoned wife. I started seeing myself as a witness. The next court session was different. When my husband repeated his claims about my emotional distance, I didn't flinch. When his lawyer painted me as difficult, I didn't interrupt. Because I had learned something crucial. Let them talk. Let them commit to their version of events. Because the louder the lie, the harder it falls when truth enters the room. Then the judge asked a simple question. "When exactly did the relationship with the other woman begin?" My husband answered confidently. "After the separation," he said. "Much later." Too confidently. I glanced at my lawyer. She didn't smile. But she nodded. That was the moment I knew. The story they were telling was fragile. And they didn't realize yet that they had just locked themselves into it. The trap wasn't sprung. Not yet. But it was set. And when it snapped shut, it would change everything. 3. The evidence they didn't expect. The following week, the courtroom felt smaller than ever. Every eye was on us. Every whisper seemed amplified. The press had caught wind of the case, though no names were mentioned publicly. Yet the tension outside the walls seeped in, making every footstep echo like an accusation. I walked in with a folder in my hand, shaking slightly. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline that comes when you finally hold the proof that can rewrite a story. My lawyer gave me a quiet nod. "Are you ready?" I nodded back. Because this was the moment I stopped being the silent observer of my own life. The session began as usual. My husband and his lawyer, confident, rehearsed smiles plastered across their faces. The other woman sat beside him, calm, detached, like a chess player watching pawns move across the board. Then my lawyer stood. She didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She simply opened the folder and placed it on the table. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady, "I have documents that tell a different story than the one presented." There was a pause, long enough for the courtroom to lean in. Emails, receipts, and calendar entries proved the affair started months before the supposed separation. And they showed deliberate concealment. The judge raised an eyebrow. My husband's confident expression flickered for the first time. "Proceed," he said. We began with the emails. Messages my husband had sent to the other woman, timestamps clearly showing overlap with my attempts to communicate with him, with evenings spent at home, family events I had organized. Each email was a hammer strike, puncturing the facade they had built. Then came the receipts. Expensive dinners, hotel stays, gifts. All carefully hidden in credit card statements. Months of evidence meticulously concealed. The courtroom was silent. Even the stenographer paused, fingers hovering above the keyboard as if sensing the weight of what was unfolding. And then the twist. We pulled up calendar entries, digital evidence that could not be disputed. Dates marked as business trip were contradicted by GPS location history. Places he claimed he was working alone were locations where the other woman was repeatedly checked in. He hadn't just lied. He had constructed an elaborate story, assuming no one could uncover it. I saw his eyes flicker, panic buried beneath practiced composure. The other woman's calm demeanor faltered as well. She whispered something to him, a slight tremor in her voice. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. Because in court, nothing is final until it is pronounced. The judge leaned forward, tapping the documents. "This changes the context," he murmured. "Are these verified?" "Yes, Your Honor," my lawyer said firmly. "Verified and time-stamped. There is no ambiguity." The energy in the courtroom shifted. Suddenly, the balance of power wavered. My husband's confident narrative had cracks, and everyone could see them forming. I felt a small spark of vindication. Not revenge, but clarity. Outside the courtroom, whispers were already spreading. Lawyers and clerks exchanged glances. A few sympathetic eyes looked my way, sensing the turn of events. I could feel it too, the first taste of control returning to me. But even as I felt stronger, a new fear crept in. Because this wasn't just about proving infidelity anymore. It was about timing, motive, and intent. And my husband, he had one final trick up his sleeve. The next hearing was scheduled for cross-examination. I didn't sleep the night before. I went over every email, every receipt, every GPS entry. My mind ran scenarios. What if he claimed hacking? What if he fabricated timestamps? My lawyer reassured me, but I had learned not to rely on reassurance. The courtroom was packed that day. Journalists and a few curious onlookers filled the back benches. Everyone was waiting for the storm to break. My husband's lawyer tried to minimize the impact of the documents, claiming normal professional overlap and misinterpretation of social messages. But then came the subtle, fatal mistake. He accidentally referred to one email by the wrong date, one that contradicted his previous testimony. It was almost imperceptible, but the judge caught it. "Wait," he said. "This date does not align with your previous statement. Can you clarify?" The slip was small. But in court, small cracks become avalanches. I watched as panic spread like wildfire across my husband's expression. The other woman's composure wavered. My lawyer leaned forward, eyes glinting with the satisfaction of someone who has been preparing for this moment for months. I realized then this wasn't just evidence. This was strategy exposure. And it had a domino effect. After a tense pause, my husband tried to recover. "It's a clerical error," he said, voice slightly trembling. "Nothing significant." The judge wasn't convinced. "Clerical error?" he asked. "We are discussing relationships, timelines, and potentially perjury. A clerical error in this context is significant." The courtroom murmured. I could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down, even before it was spoken aloud. And then came the unexpected twist that would be the talk of the court for weeks. My lawyer asked to introduce one final piece of evidence, a series of messages the other woman had sent to a close friend, discussing the affair in detail. Explicit acknowledgement that she was aware of my ongoing attempts to save the marriage, and that she had been intentionally pursuing him during that period. The judge allowed it. The courtroom went silent as the printed messages were read aloud. This was never disclosed before," my husband stammered. The other woman's eyes widened. She looked directly at the judge, caught in her own narrative. I felt neither joy nor revenge. I felt a calm certainty. For the first time, the truth was speaking louder than lies. The judge adjourned for the day, his expression unreadable. As the crowd dispersed, I walked out with my lawyer. People whispered. Some offered discreet congratulations. Others simply stared, sensing that a story much bigger than marriage had just begun to unravel. And I knew one thing. The battle wasn't over. But now, I had the upper hand. 4. The courtroom explosion. The next day, I entered the courtroom with a quiet determination I hadn't felt before. The air smelled heavy with anticipation, like electricity before a storm. Journalists lined the back rows, their pens ready, cameras silently recording. Every eye in the room seemed to track my every move. For the first time, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like someone who was about to reclaim her story. Across the aisle, my husband's expression was tense, his carefully constructed calm beginning to crack. The other woman sat beside him, her posture rigid, as if she sensed the walls closing in. They had underestimated me. They had underestimated how much I had observed, documented, and prepared. My lawyer rose to speak first. "Your Honor," she began, her voice smooth but commanding, "we have additional evidence that directly contradicts the testimony presented by the defense." The courtroom fell silent. Emails, messages, and receipts previously submitted reveal one narrative. But there is a second layer. Financial transactions and GPS data that exposes not only an ongoing affair but deliberate concealment of these actions from the plaintiff. A faint murmur went through the room. My husband's lawyer's lips pressed into a thin line. He knew this could shift the entire case. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. My lawyer asked the court to review a folder I had prepared. A series of dated photographs, screenshots of messages, and financial statements proving premeditation and deception. The judge examined them carefully. The camera caught my husband's hand trembling ever so slightly, a detail I noticed even in the heat of the moment. The other woman's eyes widened as she recognized herself in one of the images, clearly unaware that this evidence existed. Your Honor, my lawyer continued, the timeline provided by the defense is inaccurate. The relationship was ongoing during the period my client made numerous attempts to repair the marriage. This demonstrates not only deceit, but also intentional emotional manipulation. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. I remember sitting there, hands folded on my lap, heart pounding, not out of fear but out of clarity. I realized that all the pain I had endured was converging into a single undeniable truth. For years, I had been made to feel like the problem, like the person at fault. Now the evidence was dismantling that illusion piece by piece. And then came the twist that no one saw coming. One of the defense witnesses, a close colleague of my husband, was called unexpectedly. He had been brought to testify about my alleged emotional neglect. The story had been rehearsed carefully, but under questioning, cracks began to appear. Can you confirm the dates of these supposed neglectful incidents? My lawyer asked calmly. There was a pause. Then the witness stammered. Well, I might have gotten some dates wrong. My lawyer leaned forward. Incorrect dates or intentionally misrepresented events? The courtroom went silent. The witness shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting toward my husband, clearly seeking reassurance. There was none. That small falter set off a cascade of revelations. Documents once accepted as uncontested were now re-examined. Emails and messages that my husband had claimed were professional or innocuous were revealed to be intimate and deliberate. The other woman's demeanor changed as well. She whispered under her breath, caught by the judge, betraying a nervousness she had never shown. It was at that precise moment I realized something crucial. They hadn't just been lying. They had underestimated how prepared I was to fight back. Then came the most explosive moment of the day. A new piece of evidence was introduced. A voice recording that my husband had accidentally left on his phone during one of our last arguments. Intended to be private, never shared with anyone. The recording captured him discussing plans with the other woman, including details of how to make the separation appear mutually agreed upon, while emotionally manipulating me. The courtroom went silent as the recording played. Every word was a dagger of betrayal, exposing their intentions in stark clarity. I could feel a mix of anger, vindication, and sorrow, but more than anything I felt powerful. The judge, after reviewing the recording, looked at my husband and said, "Do you have anything to say about this evidence?" His mouth opened then closed. Nothing. The other woman shifted in her seat, her calm facade shattered. I realized then that the truth has a way of manifesting suddenly, and when it does, even the most meticulous lies crumble. My lawyer requested a short recess, and during that time, whispers filled the courtroom. People speculated about the consequences, about the credibility of the defendants. Some glances were sympathetic toward me. Others betrayed judgment. It was overwhelming, but in a different way than before. I didn't feel helpless. I felt seen. I felt heard. And more importantly, I felt like the story could finally turn. After the recess, the courtroom reconvened. My lawyer presented financial records that revealed additional hidden expenses paid by my husband in secret. Luxury dinners, hotel stays, gifts, all aligning perfectly with the timeline of the affair. Even more shocking was a set of GPS logs that contradicted every claim my husband had made about being at work or traveling alone. The combination of physical proof, digital evidence, and testimonies created an unassailable chain. And then came the twist that left everyone gasping. My husband had signed one of these documents himself, an expense report he had submitted to his company. The date and details perfectly aligned with the evidence I presented. It was his own signature, proving his deception. The tension reached its peak when the judge paused, reviewing the chain of evidence. "This is significant," he said slowly. "It appears there is clear evidence of intentional deception and misrepresentation." The courtroom remained silent. My husband's confident composure had vanished. The other woman's expression shifted from arrogance to fear. For the first time, I saw them as fallible. I saw the cracks in the armor they had presented for months. As the hearing ended, I walked out of the courtroom with my lawyer. Outside, the cold air felt different, cleaner, almost victorious. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate, because this was not the end. It was only the beginning of the reckoning. The truth had finally entered the room, but the final verdict, justice, was still to come. And one thing was certain. They had misjudged me. They had assumed silence meant weakness. But now silence had become my weapon. And when the next chapter unfolds, it will be the one that changes everything permanently. 5. The desperation of truth. The courtroom was silent, yet the air felt thick enough to choke on. Every detail mattered. Every whisper, every shuffle of papers, every glance could tilt the balance. I walked in that morning feeling a strange mix of anticipation and dread. Anticipation because finally, after months of lies, I had the upper hand. Dread because I knew my husband was desperate, and desperate people take reckless actions. Across the room I caught his eyes. There was no calm anymore. His hands trembled slightly as he held onto the edge of the table. The other woman beside him looked anxious, a sharp contrast to her previously composed demeanor. They had underestimated me from the very beginning, and now the walls were closing in. My lawyer rose to begin, her voice confident but controlled. Your Honor, today we are presenting additional evidence directly disproving the defendant's testimony regarding emotional abandonment and the timeline of events leading to the separation. The judge nodded, signaling her to proceed. She pulled out a folder containing receipts, GPS data, and screenshots of conversations. But what came next would change everything. A video recording. Not just any recording. This was a home security clip my husband had forgotten to delete from a shared cloud storage account. It showed him leaving the house late at night, meeting the other woman near a cafe, weeks before he claimed the affair began. The judge leaned forward, squinting at the screen as the footage played. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the projector. I could see the shock ripple through my husband. The other woman's lips parted slightly, as if realizing that every lie they had told was crumbling in front of her. And then the twist that no one expected. My husband tried to intervene mid-testimony, shouting at the judge, claiming the video was fake. Objection! He yelled, voice trembling but loud. This is fabricated. This is manipulated evidence. The courtroom collectively held its breath. My lawyer smiled faintly. Your Honor, the digital metadata confirms the time, date, and source. The video is unaltered. The judge's gaze hardened. Counselor, continue. My husband's desperate act had only highlighted his panic. It was clear he had run out of carefully rehearsed defenses. Then came another layer. Financial evidence showing secret bank transfers and payments to the other woman. These were not casual gifts. They were deliberate, recurring expenses. Each transaction had a timestamp aligning perfectly with the timeline of our supposed separation. This was more than infidelity. This was premeditation, concealment, and manipulation. The courtroom felt like it was holding its collective breath. Every person present seemed to sense the gravity of what was unfolding. My husband's lawyer attempted to salvage the situation by claiming that the transactions were work-related reimbursements. But my lawyer was prepared. She presented emails from the companies in question, proving that all claims of reimbursement were false. Every payment went directly to personal accounts belonging to the other woman. The judge leaned back, rubbing his temples. This significantly undermines the defendant's credibility. And I felt a quiet vindication rise inside me. Not joy, not triumph, but a deep, steady sense of justice beginning to manifest. Then came the emotional confrontation that would become the turning point of the case. My lawyer turned to me and asked if I was ready to speak. I had rehearsed every word, every pause, every breath. But as I stood, the courtroom felt suddenly smaller, charged with an intensity one had never experienced before. Your Honor, I began, my voice steady but infused with emotion. For months, I have been accused of neglecting my marriage, being emotionally distant and pushing my husband away. But the truth is, I paused, letting my gaze meet my husband's. He flinched. The other woman's composure cracked. I was fighting to save the marriage while he was secretly building a life with someone else. Every lie he told, every denial was intended to erase me, to rewrite history as if I never loved him at all. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Every word I spoke landed like a hammer strike. And then came the major twist that turned the entire narrative upside down. During cross-examination, my lawyer revealed something my husband had completely overlooked. A series of text messages he had sent to another coworker, suggesting he had financial and personal motives beyond romance. Intent to secure assets, manipulate shared accounts, and fabricate my supposed emotional neglect to gain legal advantage. He had thought those messages were private. He had thought no one would check. But they were preserved, time-stamped, and authentic. The courtroom gasped. Even the judge leaned forward in disbelief. My husband's face went pale. The other woman looked mortified, realizing the depth of the exposure. It was at that moment that I understood the full power of evidence. Truth isn't loud. It doesn't demand attention. It simply exists, and when discovered, it topples mountains built on lies. The judge, after reviewing all the materials, asked my husband one final question. Do you have anything to say about these revelations? He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again, and finally muttered, I cannot deny these messages. The silence that followed was almost holy. Every word I had waited to hear for months had finally emerged. As the session adjourned, whispers spread like wildfire. Everyone outside the courtroom sensed that the tides had turned irrevocably. I walked out, shoulders straight, head held high. Not because I had won, because the battle was not over, but because I had reclaimed my voice. For the first time, I felt truly empowered. The lies that had threatened to define my life were no longer untouchable. And I knew in my heart that the next chapters would expose even deeper truths. Truths my husband and the other woman could never anticipate. Because in the end, when deception meets evidence, justice, though slow, is inevitable. 6. The climax of truth. The courtroom that morning felt different. The air was heavy with anticipation. A tension so thick it seemed to press down on everyone in the room. The judge, normally reserved, seemed alert, almost visibly bracing himself for what was about to unfold. I walked in slowly, holding a folder containing months of collected evidence. I wasn't nervous. I was resolute. Every step I took felt deliberate, like a countdown to a moment that had been building for years. Across the room, my husband's face was pale. The arrogance that had once shielded him from reality was gone. The other woman beside him looked equally tense, her composure fractured by the storm of exposure that was now unavoidable. The session began with a review of the key evidence. Emails, messages, receipts, GPS logs, everything that proved their deceit. The judge studied the documents intently, occasionally glancing up at my husband, whose confidence had now been replaced with desperation. Your Honor, my lawyer began, her tone calm but forceful, we have additional testimony to present, direct evidence that further contradicts the claims of emotional abandonment made by the defense. This testimony comes from individuals directly involved and aware of the timeline of events leading to the breakdown of the marriage. The courtroom murmured. Whispers filled the room as the gravity of the statement sank in. My husband's lawyer shifted uncomfortably, realizing that this was not just another day in court, it was a turning point. The first witness was a close family friend who had observed the subtle signs of infidelity long before I realized what was happening. I noticed that Daniel was behaving differently months before he claimed separation, the friend testified. He would leave meetings abruptly, avoid family events, and frequently check his phone in secret. The judge nodded. Can you provide specific examples? Yes, the witness continued. There were multiple occasions where he claimed to be working late, yet I personally saw him with another woman in various public locations, coinciding with dates he said he was alone. The court fell silent. Even my husband's lawyer did not attempt an objection. The testimony was backed with photographic evidence. Then came the most crucial moment of the day, a set of messages the other woman had sent to a mutual friend, revealing her awareness of my ongoing attempts to save the marriage. She knew I was trying to reconcile with him. I told the court, my voice steady. And she deliberately pursued him, knowing the impact it would have on our family and my life. The judge reviewed the printed messages carefully. This is significant, he remarked. It clearly demonstrates intent and knowledge of wrongdoing. My husband's face went pale. The other woman's expression shifted from arrogance to panic. The tension reached its peak during cross-examination. My lawyer methodically dismantled their defenses. Every statement my husband made, every alibi he provided, was contradicted by irrefutable evidence. GPS records, emails, and receipts aligned perfectly with the timeline of his deceit. At one point, my lawyer asked, "Can you explain why these hotel receipts, signed expense forms, and GPS records indicate your presence with the other woman during dates you claim to be working late or attending meetings?" My husband opened his mouth, then closed it. His voice, when it finally came, was weak. I don't have an explanation. The courtroom gasped. Then came the shocking revelation that changed everything. A private investigator, hired months earlier, was called to testify. He presented photographs of secret meetings, financial documents showing transfers, and even recordings of private conversations where my husband and the other woman discussed how to manipulate the narrative to make it appear as though I had abandoned the marriage emotionally. The judge's eyebrows rose. This is highly irregular and damning. I could feel my heart racing, but it wasn't fear. It was relief. Every lie they had told, every attempt to rewrite history was collapsing in real time. The other woman was called to testify. Her confident facade had crumbled completely. Were you aware that she was attempting to save her marriage during this time? My lawyer asked. Yes, she hesitated. But I thought it was already over. The judge intervened. You were aware, yet you proceeded to encourage the affair? Her silence spoke louder than words. My husband's desperation became palpable. In a last-ditch effort, he tried to discredit the evidence by claiming digital manipulation and falsified records. But my lawyer was prepared. Each piece of evidence was backed by verified timestamps, cross-referenced with independent sources. His attempts to fabricate doubt only reinforced the authenticity of the proof. Even the judge commented, "The depth of evidence presented here leaves little room for dispute." As the hearing progressed, I realized the courtroom had shifted. What had once been a room of judgment now felt like a stage for truth to reclaim itself. Every lie had a response. Every manipulation was countered. And the power dynamic had completely reversed. I looked at my husband. The man who had once controlled the narrative with words and charm was now exposed, vulnerable, and cornered. The other woman beside him was no longer a symbol of allure. She was a participant in deception, fully accountable for her role. Then came a pause in proceedings, as the judge reviewed the full timeline, cross-referencing testimony, documents, and digital evidence. The courtroom held its collective breath. This was the moment when everything would hinge on the final interpretation of truth. Finally, the judge spoke. Based on the evidence, testimony, and documentation presented, it is evident that the claims of abandonment are unsubstantiated. The affair was premeditated, intentional, and concealed, directly contradicting the defendant's narrative. The words resonated in the room like thunder. My husband's lawyer sat frozen, his confidence shattered. The other woman stared, unable to respond. For the first time, I felt a profound sense of vindication. Not triumph, not satisfaction, something deeper. Relief, yes, but more than that, a restoration of agency, of dignity, of truth. I had been underestimated, erased, and blamed. Yet here I stood, my story intact, my evidence undeniable, my voice heard. And I knew that the next steps, though procedural, would only solidify what had already been revealed. The deceit could no longer withstand scrutiny. As the session adjourned, people whispered in awe. Some offered discreet congratulations, others simply watched, stunned. I walked out, head held high, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and empowerment. The battle had reached its peak. The lies were exposed, the manipulations unveiled. And the next chapter, Chapter 7, would be about the final courtroom verdict, emotional closure, and the ultimate twist that no one expected. Because even after months of deception, the truth had found its voice. 7. The verdict of truth. The courtroom that morning felt like the calm before a storm. Every person present seemed aware that today, the culmination of months of lies, deceit, and betrayal would finally reach a conclusion. The air was tense, charged with a mixture of anticipation, anxiety, and the unspoken knowledge that this was not just a legal proceeding. It was a reckoning. I walked in slowly, carrying the weight of every emotion I had felt over the past months. Hurt, betrayal, anger, disbelief, but also clarity, resolve, and a quiet strength that had grown from surviving the unimaginable. My lawyer gave me a reassuring nod. Today, I was no longer a passive observer of my own life. I was an active participant, armed with truth and undeniable evidence. Across the room, my husband sat rigid, a shadow of the confident man he had been at the start of this ordeal. The other woman beside him avoided my gaze, her composed exterior shattered. For months they had controlled the narrative, rewriting history to their advantage. Today the walls they had built were crumbling brick by brick, under the weight of truth. The judge entered, his presence commanding immediate attention. Silence fell. The murmurs from the previous hearings had vanished, replaced by an almost sacred stillness. Every eye in the room followed his movements, the air thick with suspense. After careful review of all evidence, testimony, and documentation submitted in this case, the judge began, his voice steady but firm. It is evident that the claims made by the defendant regarding emotional abandonment are unsubstantiated and contradicted by verifiable evidence. The timeline of the affair, financial concealment, and documented communications confirm premeditated deception. A shiver ran through the room. My husband's face drained of color. The other woman's lips parted slightly, her composure gone entirely. This was the moment when months of planning, lying, and manipulation finally collapsed. The judge continued, detailing the specific evidence that had led to his decision. Photographs, emails, text messages, GPS logs, financial records, all meticulously organized and presented, had painted an undeniable picture of betrayal. You have presented clear evidence of intentional deceit, concealment of actions, and manipulation designed to misrepresent the truth, the judge said. As such, the court recognizes the plaintiff's position and validates her account of the events leading to the dissolution of this marriage. I sat there, heart pounding, not in fear but in a profound sense of relief. The validation I had been denied for months, the acknowledgement of my truth, was finally being declared publicly. The courtroom was silent except for the soft rustle of papers and the occasional gasp. My lawyer leaned slightly towards me, whispering, "This is it. Justice is being acknowledged." And then the final declaration, the words that had been delayed but never denied, came. The court rules in favor of the plaintiff regarding the claims of emotional betrayal and manipulation. The defendant's attempts to rewrite history and portray the plaintiff as the cause of marital breakdown are rejected. Custody, division of assets, and related legal determinations will proceed in accordance with these findings. A sense of weight lifted from me. Not just legal weight but emotional, psychological, and spiritual. I had survived the storm, and now justice, slow as it may be, had caught up with the truth. After the verdict, my husband's face was unreadable. The arrogance, the confidence, the charm, all gone. The other woman avoided all eye contact, a silent acknowledgement that their narrative had been dismantled. The power they had once wielded so confidently was now gone. For me, this moment was not about revenge. It was about recognition, about reclaiming a story that had been stolen, about taking back my voice, my dignity, and my life. Outside the courtroom, the world seemed different. The air was fresher, lighter, carrying the hum of city life that felt almost celebratory. Friends and family greeted me, some with tears, some with hugs, others simply with nods of acknowledgement. Everyone had witnessed the transformation, not just the legal victory, but the personal empowerment it represented. I walked slowly, reflecting on the months that had led to this moment. The late-night phone calls, the sleepless nights filled with anxiety, the relentless pursuit of evidence. All of it had brought me here. And in this reflection I realized something profound. Survival isn't passive. It requires courage, persistence, and an unwavering belief in truth. That evening I sat alone in my apartment, reviewing the case files one last time. Each document, each email, each photograph told a story. Not just of betrayal but of resilience. I thought about how easily my life could have been rewritten by lies if I hadn't fought. And I felt a deep gratitude not just for justice, but for the lessons learned along the way. I realized that pain, while excruciating, had strengthened me. Betrayal, while shattering, had clarified who I truly was. And the courtroom, with all its tension and drama, had become a stage where truth finally emerged, unstoppable and undeniable. In the weeks that followed, I began to rebuild my life. Small steps at first, reorganizing my home, reconnecting with friends, and exploring passions I had set aside. Every action felt deliberate, every choice a reclamation of autonomy. I had been silenced for months, but now I spoke with confidence, my voice carrying the weight of experience and the authority of truth. The experience had changed me, not into someone hardened or bitter, but into someone aware, discerning, and unafraid. I had learned that betrayal reveals not just the character of others, but the depth of one's own resilience. Reflecting on the journey, I understood that this story was about more than a marriage. More than deceit, more than courtroom battles. It was about finding one's own strength in the face of overwhelming odds. About realizing that even when the world seems to turn against you, truth and perseverance can restore what was taken, and even reveal a power you never knew you had. I had started this journey broken, hurt, and uncertain, but I emerged not just vindicated, but empowered, ready to face life on my own terms. And in the quiet moments, I finally allowed myself to feel something I had been denied for too long: peace. Peace that comes from knowing that lies, no matter how carefully constructed, cannot withstand the weight of truth. Peace that comes from reclaiming one's voice after months of silence. Peace that comes from realizing that even in betrayal, there is the possibility of growth, strength, and ultimately freedom. As I closed the case files for the last time, I smiled softly to myself. The journey was far from over. Life would always bring challenges, but I was no longer afraid. I had faced deceit, endured heartbreak, and survived. And in that survival, I had discovered my true strength. The courtroom had been the battlefield. Truth had been the weapon. And I had finally won, not just in law but in life. 8. Rebuilding and revelation. The weeks after the verdict were surreal. The courtroom had closed its doors, but the echoes of truth still reverberated through every part of my life. Friends and family reached out constantly, some with words of support, others with silent recognition of the journey I had endured. Yet despite the validation, I felt a peculiar emptiness, a space left behind by months of betrayal, lies, and emotional exhaustion. I had won in court. The evidence had proven the affair, the deception, and the manipulation. Yet winning didn't erase the nights I cried, the moments I questioned myself, or the trust one had once given freely. It only clarified a harsh truth. Some wounds take time to heal, even when justice is served. In the days following the verdict, I began to rebuild the small personal routines that once grounded me. Morning walks, the smell of fresh coffee, reading books I had abandoned, reconnecting with old friends. Each small act felt monumental. Each was a reclamation of life, a statement that I could exist independently of the chaos that had surrounded me for so long. Yet, amidst this rebuilding, life had one final twist in store. A revelation I had never anticipated. It arrived unexpectedly in the form of a letter, hand-delivered to my apartment. The envelope was plain, the handwriting unfamiliar. Curious but cautious, I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small flash drive. The note read, "You have won the legal battle, but there are truths you do not yet know. The attached files reveal decisions made in your absence, actions that affect more than just your marriage." My hand shook as I examined the flash drive. Part of me hesitated, knowing it could contain painful truths, but curiosity won over fear. I connected the drive to my computer. Files, photographs, financial documents, and voice recordings filled the screen. It quickly became clear. My husband and the other woman had attempted a hidden plan far deeper than the affair. They had tried to manipulate shared assets, diverting funds into accounts I had no access to, potentially jeopardizing not only my financial stability, but also the inheritance I had worked years to preserve. Even more shocking, there were emails indicating attempts to influence mutual friends and business associates, essentially trying to rewrite my personal and professional narrative outside the courtroom. This was more than infidelity. This was an attempt to erase me entirely from all spheres of life, socially, financially, and emotionally. As I absorbed the depth of their deception, I realized the gravity of what remained. The legal victory was significant, but there were battles that law alone could not protect. It was a harsh reminder. Some forms of betrayal exist beyond the reach of courtrooms. Yet, in the midst of this revelation, I felt a strange calm. I had faced deceit once, and I was equipped to face it again. I had learned to analyze, document, and defend. This time, the advantage was mine before the fight even began. I contacted my lawyer immediately. She confirmed that while some of the financial maneuvers were outside the immediate scope of the divorce settlement, the evidence could be used in additional proceedings. "This is leverage," she said. "You have the opportunity to protect yourself fully and prevent further manipulation." Her words ignited a spark within me. Not vengeance, but strategic empowerment. I was no longer reacting. I was acting on my own terms with clarity and precision. During this period, I also focused on rebuilding personal relationships that had been strained by months of stress and secrecy. Friends who had doubted my resilience began to see me differently. Colleagues who had been skeptical of my ability to maintain composure now treated me with a quiet respect. Even family members who had been distant became involved, supporting me not just emotionally but practically, helping to ensure that any lingering manipulations would be neutralized. And then came the most unexpected twist of all. An anonymous call from someone who claimed to be a close friend of the other woman. "I think you deserve to know," the voice said, calm but urgent. She was planning to take more than your husband. There's something about your family estate. She wanted control of more than just his life." My heart raced, but I remained composed. I asked questions carefully, extracting details. It became clear that their plan involved long-term financial exploitation, targeting not only my husband's resources, but potentially mine as well. This revelation could have been devastating, but instead it galvanized me. I realized that knowledge is power, and foresight allows action before damage occurs. With my lawyer's guidance, I began preparing the next steps. Notifications to banks, verification of accounts, documentation of every transaction, and securing all personal and professional assets. Each step was deliberate, each action a shield against further deception, and through it all I felt a growing sense of freedom. The court had recognized my truth, the evidence had dismantled the lies, and now I had the tools to ensure no one could harm me again. In quieter moments, I reflected on the transformation I had undergone. I had entered this journey as someone uncertain, hurt, and searching for validation. Now I was a woman who had faced profound betrayal, exposed deception, and reclaimed her life with courage and clarity. I understood that strength is not simply surviving. It is learning, adapting, and emerging more resilient than before. Finally, I allowed myself a moment of introspection. I thought of my husband, the other woman, and all the deceit that had surrounded me. I did not feel hatred. I did not feel the need for revenge. I felt something more profound: understanding, closure, and empowerment. The court had provided justice, but life had given me something even greater: a sense of self-worth, an awareness of my own strength, and a commitment to protect my life from further manipulation. I knew the road ahead would still have challenges, but now I faced it with clarity and confidence, fully aware of my resilience and my capacity to thrive. As the sun set that evening, I looked out my window at the city below, feeling the weight of months lift from my shoulders. The storm had passed, leaving behind not just victory, but wisdom, strength, and a renewed sense of purpose. The revelations, though shocking, had taught me an invaluable lesson. Truth is unyielding, resilience is unstoppable, and a life reclaimed is a life truly empowered. And in that moment I smiled softly, knowing that while the chapters of deceit had ended, the chapters of my life, stronger, wiser, and fully my own, were only just beginning. 9. Reflections and a new beginning. The quiet after the storm is always the hardest to navigate. For months my life had been consumed by betrayal, lies, and courtroom battles. The intense highs and lows of the hearings, the suspense of evidence revelations, the exposure of deception, it had all left me emotionally drained. Yet in this stillness I realized something profound. Surviving the ordeal was only the beginning. Rebuilding, reflecting, and growing from it would define the rest of my life. Sitting by my window one morning, sunlight streaming across the room, I felt an unfamiliar sense of calm. The chaos of the past months, the relentless stress, the sleepless nights, the heartache had finally settled. I allowed myself to acknowledge the pain, the betrayal, and the fear, but I also embraced the clarity, empowerment, and lessons that had emerged from it. The first and most important lesson I learned: truth has a power beyond words. No matter how clever the lies, no matter how carefully deceit is crafted, truth always has a way of revealing itself. Evidence, persistence, and observation may be tools, but the core of justice lies in transparency. This realization reshaped the way I saw myself. I had been silenced, doubted, and gaslight, yet here I was, vindicated and stronger than ever. It was not revenge that sustained me. It was the pursuit of truth, the unwavering commitment to clarity, and the courage to face the unknown. And that courage became the foundation of my transformation. The second lesson was equally profound. Resilience is cultivated in adversity. Before this journey, I had believed strength was innate. I thought resilience was a trait one either possessed or lacked. But months of navigating lies, courtroom scrutiny, and emotional manipulation taught me that resilience is forged in the fire of struggle. Every sleepless night, every meticulous effort to document evidence, every confrontation with my husband and the other woman, each was a trial, a test of willpower, and each had strengthened me. I realized that resilience is not just enduring hardships. It is learning, adapting, and reclaiming agency in a world that seeks to undermine it. The third insight was perhaps the most personal. Empowerment is inseparable from self-awareness. I had entered this journey uncertain of my own voice, hesitant to trust my instincts, and frequently doubting my perceptions. But as the legal process unfolded, as the evidence mounted, and as the truths of betrayal became undeniable, I began to trust myself. Self-awareness, understanding my emotions, recognizing manipulation, and acknowledging my strengths, became my most powerful weapon. It allowed me not only to navigate the chaos but also to emerge with dignity, clarity, and the ability to make deliberate choices for my future. In the weeks after the final revelations, I began to rebuild more intentionally. My relationships were nurtured with honesty and openness. Friends who had supported me became pillars of strength. Family bonds, once strained by uncertainty, were fortified through understanding and shared resolve. And I reconnected with myself, not just emotionally, but spiritually and mentally, establishing routines and practices that grounded me in calm and focus. I found solace in simple moments. Reading by the window, long walks that cleared my mind, journaling thoughts and reflections, and rediscovering passions that had been neglected. Each step forward was deliberate, each action a reclamation of autonomy and self-respect. But life, as it always does, continued to challenge me. The final revelation from the other woman's hidden plans reminded me that vigilance is essential. Life may present hidden threats and subtle manipulations, but armed with clarity and awareness, one can navigate these obstacles without fear. Rather than feeling anger or bitterness, I felt empowerment. Knowledge, strategy, and self-confidence transformed potential threats into opportunities for preparation and control. I understood that my power lay not in controlling others, but in mastering my own life, choices, and boundaries. One afternoon, I reflected deeply on forgiveness, not for their sake but for mine. Forgiveness does not mean condoning betrayal or deceit. It does not mean erasing pain or pretending events never happened. Forgiveness is a conscious choice to release the weight of anger, resentment, and obsession with past wrongs. By forgiving, not forgetting, I reclaimed my energy. I no longer needed to live in the shadow of their actions. I could move forward with clarity, focusing on growth, possibilities, and building a life aligned with my values. The courtroom experience, while intense and painful, had become a catalyst for transformation. I had started as someone uncertain, hurt, and manipulated, and I had emerged with resilience, empowerment, and insight. I had learned to observe, to document, to assert my voice, and to reclaim my narrative. Life had taught me that setbacks, betrayals, and manipulations, while devastating in the moment, can ultimately catalyze growth if met with courage, awareness, and determination. Looking ahead, I understood that life is not defined solely by the battles we fight, but by the wisdom we extract from them. I would continue to navigate challenges, but now with the knowledge that deception can be unveiled, betrayal can be countered, and strength can be cultivated. I had experienced the worst and emerged victorious, not just in court, but in the most important court of all, my own life. In the quiet moments, I allowed myself to dream again, freely without hesitation or fear. I envisioned a life filled with clarity, honesty, and meaningful connections. I envisioned a future where my voice and my decisions were honored, where trust was mutual, and where love, whether platonic or romantic, was grounded in truth. The past had tested me. The deception had tried to break me. But through it all, I discovered a power I had never imagined. The power to rise, rebuild, and redefine my life on my own terms. As the sun set that evening, casting a golden glow across the city, I felt a profound sense of closure. The chapters of betrayal, courtroom drama, and revelation had ended, but the chapters of growth, empowerment, and self-discovery were only beginning. And in that moment, I realized the ultimate lesson of my journey. Truth is unstoppable, resilience is cultivated, empowerment is reclaimed, and a life rebuilt on clarity, courage, and awareness is a life truly free. I smiled softly, knowing that the storm had passed, and what remained was not just survival, but transformation, wisdom, and the unshakable strength of a woman who had faced betrayal and emerged unstoppable. 10. Epilogue and the final twist. The months that followed the courtroom saga were a study in patience, resilience, and quiet transformation. Life, which had once felt fractured and chaotic, began to regain its rhythm. But even in the calm, I sensed that some truths still lingered, waiting to be uncovered. I had rebuilt routines, reconnected with friends, and created a life where clarity, honesty, and self-awareness were my guiding principles. But the final chapter was not just about what had ended, it was about what was beginning. One evening, while reviewing old correspondence for personal records, I noticed something unusual. A series of emails, previously overlooked, hinted at a secret my husband had kept hidden even from the other woman. Curiosity, and a lingering sense of caution, compelled me to dig deeper. The emails revealed financial decisions, hidden investments, and interactions with business associates that had been intentionally concealed. It became clear that even though the courtroom had addressed the overt acts of deceit and betrayal, there were layers beneath that could have impacted my life if I had not discovered them in time. I contacted my lawyer again. She advised me to approach the situation cautiously, emphasizing the importance of verifying every detail before taking action. Together, we cross-checked the information, confirmed the authenticity of the documents, and built a timeline that demonstrated both the scope of manipulation and the foresight needed to protect myself fully. This phase of discovery, though challenging, reinforced a crucial lesson. Truth is multi-layered, and diligence is essential for complete empowerment. Amidst the legal follow-up, I began to focus more intentionally on personal growth. I explored creative projects that had been set aside during the turmoil, pursued passions that had been neglected, and invested in relationships grounded in authenticity and trust. Each step was deliberate, each choice a reinforcement of my agency and independence. It was during this period that I realized something profound. While legal victories provide validation, personal empowerment comes from self-discovery, reflection, and deliberate action. Then the final twist unfolded. An unexpected visitor arrived, a former colleague of my husband, someone I had not interacted with directly during the court proceedings. He brought information that none of us had anticipated. A confession, written and signed, detailing additional schemes orchestrated by my husband and the other woman to manipulate assets and reputations beyond what the court had uncovered. This revelation could have been devastating, a shadow over the closure I had achieved. But instead I viewed it as confirmation of a larger truth. Deception, no matter how sophisticated, cannot withstand transparency and preparedness. I shared the documents with my lawyer, and we devised a final measured strategy. The aim was not revenge, it was defense, prevention, and the assurance of long-term security. By addressing these final revelations strategically, I ensured that my life and assets were fully protected, leaving no room for manipulation. The process, though intense, reinforced my resilience and confidence. Beyond the legal and financial resolutions, I found the most profound transformation occurring internally. The woman I had been at the start, vulnerable, uncertain, and reactive, had evolved. I had become assertive without aggression, cautious without fear, and empowered without arrogance. I had learned to navigate complexity, confront deception, and reclaim my narrative fully. Every experience, every betrayal, and every courtroom battle had become a stepping stone, shaping a version of myself I had only glimpsed in moments of introspection before. In the quiet of the evenings, I reflected on the journey as a whole. I realized that life is rarely linear. Challenges, betrayals, and unexpected twists are part of the human experience. What defines us is not the presence of adversity, but our response to it. I had chosen courage, clarity, and integrity, and that choice had shaped not only my legal victory but my personal growth. This epilogue was not about endings. It was about beginnings, a life informed by lessons, fortified by experience, and open to future possibilities. As time passed, I began sharing my story, not just in private circles but publicly, as a testament to resilience and empowerment. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers reached out, sharing their own experiences of betrayal, struggle, and personal growth. I realized that my journey, though intensely personal, had universal resonance. People connect with truth, courage, and the reclamation of agency. By telling my story, I not only validated my own experience but inspired others to confront challenges, recognize deception, and reclaim control over their lives. And then the final subtle twist that completed the narrative arc. I discovered that the other woman had underestimated the long-term consequences of her actions. Legal exposure, social scrutiny, and personal accountability had forced her to reconsider her life choices. In a way, the culmination of these events had created an unspoken justice, not through vengeance, but through the natural consequences of deception and manipulation. This reinforced the most important lesson of all. Truth, persistence, and integrity always find their way, even when delayed. As I stood once more by my window, watching the city lights shimmer against the night sky, I felt a profound sense of closure. The battles were over. The revelations had been confronted. Justice, both legal and personal, had been secured. But more importantly, I had transformed. I was no longer defined by betrayal or loss. I was defined by resilience, insight, and empowerment. I smiled softly, realizing that life's greatest victories are often internal. Courtrooms can declare judgment, but the ultimate triumph lies in reclaiming one's voice, dignity, and freedom. The final thought that settled in my mind, as the night enveloped the city, was simple yet powerful. Deception may shadow the path. Betrayal may wound deeply. But clarity, resilience, and courage illuminate the journey toward freedom. A life reclaimed, a voice restored, and truth upheld. This is the ultimate victory. And with that, I stepped forward into the next chapter of my life. Not as a survivor of deceit, but as a woman fully awake, fully empowered, and fully free. If my story taught you anything about courage, truth, and resilience, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe now, share this video, and join me as we uncover more real-life stories that inspire, shock, and empower. Your voice matters. Let's face the truth together.